um, uh, trends in government contracting that we are doing in partnership with the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. And today's subject is our second in our series, is on cybersecurity to prevent and protect, securing America's IT frontier. And we have a very exciting panel of senior executives from the industry. And unfortunately, we just found out less than an hour ago that our government speaker, Ms. Cyber Horn from Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Security Agency and DHS, is unable to attend, but we'll look forward to carrying on and it was an important discussion. So to do this, I'd like to introduce my colleague and frankly, my next door neighbor. We have office suites. We're in the same office suite, and when we're in the office, which is not as much as it used to be, we sit next to each other, is Dr. J.P. Offred. He's Director of Research Partnerships and Grant Initiatives at the School of Business at George Mason, and he's also the Director of the Center for Assurance Research and Engineering in the Volgenal School of Engineering at Mason. So he wears two hats. And he's also co-founder and vice president of the International Academy of Chief Information Officers, and has served on several recent Commonwealth of Virginia commissions. So I will turn it over to JP. Thanks very much, and I look forward very much to the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Jerry, and thank you to the Fairfax County Economic Development Association. Very much appreciate being here on this very current topic. We have three wonderful speakers today. Christopher Day, the Vice President for Cognitive Cyber at Mantech, Rob Simmons, the Cybersecurity Lead at Unisant, and Athena Starry, Vice President, Cyber and Signal Intelligence Division at Novetta. So a warm welcome to Christopher, Rob, and Athena, and thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you.
So Charlie and Jerry put together a wonderful synopsis of the current challenge in cybersecurity, but also with the rapidly changing technology landscape, more and more dependent upon technology, that cyber is also increasingly important. So I'd like to start to ask each of our panelists to please make a brief opening statement outlining your roles in your organizations and companies, what your focus is on, and then also what your view is of where the IT technology frontier will be in 3 to 5 years, and how cyber has changed recently. The OPM breach was just 6 years ago, and Colonial was just this last week or so. And so what's changed and what's different? And so I'd like to start with Chris, all the way from Miami, a little bit about your role at Mantech and your thoughts on the IT frontier and the changes in cyber the last 5 years.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, JP, and thank you for the welcome, and thank you for letting me participate here today. My name is Chris Day. I'm VP of Cognitive Cyber at Mantech, and I'm the Technology Focus Area Lead for Cog Cyber. My organization is responsible for most of the R&D projects that have a critical cyber nexus within the company. Views on IT or IT security in the next few years and what's changed. Wow, there's a lot there, right? So I'd say, things that we're looking at today, major architectural shifts, things like zero trust, getting a lot of the current kind of buzzword hype domination right now. But zero trust does offer a lot when it comes to trying to deal with some of the advanced adversaries and the emergent threats, things like ransomware, because it is all about reducing attack surface, validating users continuously, authenticating systems in the right ways, and doing that in contextual and dynamic ways. So, my machine can only access certain systems. It cannot do that if I'm overseas. It cannot do it outside of certain times, et cetera, or I have to do bio, auth and step-up authentications for access to other critical systems. All of those things help to reduce the attack surface for things like ransomware. So to your point about Colonial Pipeline recently. In the next couple of years, where I think we're going to see big movements, because I'm seeing it with my vendor partners today, applying ML and AI, and I know again another easily hyped area, but I'm starting to see real work there and real results in some of these areas. But using ML and AI to look at not only traditional cyber data sets, but also what I would consider non-traditional cyber sets, and using those in a unified way to detect and mitigate advanced adversaries, ideally as they approach and as they intrude into the systems, and do it at the speed of the adversary versus waiting for slow humans to deal with it. I think also we will see adversary use of AI and ML. Again, I have some real world examples of that, and happy to discuss those if we want. So,
thank you very much, Chris, for the opening. Athena, if you could please describe your role at Novetta and your views as to where technology is going in society and how cyber has changed over the last few years and where it might be going.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to participate on this panel. It is appreciated. Excited to be here. As mentioned, I'm VP of Cyber and SIGINT Division at Novetta. We are predominantly providing full spectrum of cyber capabilities in support of our federal and intelligence community customers. And it expands both on an offensive and a defensive side when it comes to cybersecurity. So threat detection, vulnerability analysis, how on the defensive side as to strengthen computer networks and environments. I too do see a strong a shift in the coming years towards AI and ML. The data to be monitored is only going to increase and become more and more, and that is certainly something that we have seen over the last 3 to 5 years in terms of more and more Internet of Things devices. Just about everything connects to the internet these days, and so there's a lot of data to be monitored and to be assessed. And so in the future years to come, there's going to be more emphasis on having really good models and for ML and AI to be able to really do some good detection and behavioral analysis of all that data that is circulating.
Thank you, Athena. And Rob, please. Sorry.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk, JP, and I look forward to the conversation we're going to be having. You can just hear in the introduction already about some of the important topics that are going on. So I work for Unisant. Unisant is a small business. I lead their cybersecurity practice, and I came from the MITRE Corporation, where I was for 19 years, working in the cybersecurity tech center there, and then working my way up to management. And so it's a fun opportunity to help a company with a history in data systems, data management, advanced data analytics, certainly cloud transition, cyber monetization, IT monetization. Cybersecurity is a piece of that. And so I'm having a good time working with this team to grow the cybersecurity capabilities and all of their historical skills and skill sets. All of our work is for the federal government. Our history has primarily been in the healthcare sector, but certainly we've got a number of relationships, which gets to one of the things that I think we'll be talking about today, which is that public-private partnership. All of us here on this panel are very much aware that the sorts of challenges that we're facing today, and certainly are going to be facing over the next 3 to 5 years, are going to be addressed through public-private partnerships. And that's an important thing that we need to keep in mind. I agree with both Chris and Athena. Artificial intelligence, it's real, and it's a capability, and I think Chris said this, that we can use as defenders and enablers, but also the attackers are going to be using it as well. And we need to keep that in mind. I'm an engineer formally by training. I'm a problem solver. And when we think about how IT is going to move over the next few years, the ability to solve these problems is going to have to move and keep up with it. And that's a challenge that I think these companies and others are all willing to work with the government, with academia, with other stakeholders to help solve those problems. One thing I do just want to add to what Chris and Athena have already talked about is that end users, mobile devices, I think Athena mentioned Internet of Things, there is still a lot of opportunity to get computing into more and more devices that just people, you and me, are interacting with day in and day out. And that's going to give us a lot of opportunities for capabilities, for new functions and features. And it's going to give the attackers another opportunity to reach into us in our daily lives, whether it's our smart vehicles, our smart homes, smart contracts, whatever. There's certainly going to be an opportunity for the adversary to look at where technology is going. So thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Athena. We'll come back to the AI and the technology questions in a little while. But you all raised this issue of collaboration in cybersecurity, whether it's between larger government contractors and smaller ones in the supply chain, or larger municipalities and smaller ones, or between public and private. But for each of you, what do you consider the keys to a good cybersecurity collaboration, and what do the different parties bring to it? So perhaps Athena, you've written and talked quite a bit on transformative leadership, which is part of partnerships. So how do you see cybersecurity collaboration?
As being important, as we with cybersecurity being obviously a very important topic and ever evolving, constantly changing very rapidly. Collaboration as with private and public is going to be very, very important, in being able to share vulnerabilities detected and how to secure those and fix those, as well as intrusion. Where are the various different intrusions? Where are they coming from? Being able to kind of share that information with each other and how to better secure only makes us that much more stronger. And some of the things that I think the pandemic definitely put a lot more emphasis on this last year, when we found ourselves working more and more remotely, not being together and hardwired into a network and having to remotely access became a much stronger emphasis on quickly adapting and utilizing emerging technologies, and really taking a hard look at your network, whether you're a small company, mid-size, or a large, to ensure that all of the remote workers that you found yourself having more of than the year before, ensuring that their access was still keeping all of the company data secure. And so that definitely brought some challenges. And being able to collaborate, you were able to quickly address them and solve some of those problems by sharing. So I definitely see that as being an important part of in the cybersecurity domain, is a way more collaboration.
Thank you, Athena. Building upon that, Rob and Chris, if you also have thoughts on how smaller companies or smaller organizations who have limited resources and limited budgets can partner with the larger ones, or what that might mean.
Well, as somebody who is in a small company, it's clearly the way we do business. Partnerships are important to us. Partnerships that strengthen our ability to solve problems. And so you can imagine that I mentioned, cloud transition and cloud security. We partner with, Microsoft for Azure, AWS. We have to, right? But we also partner with a lot of other companies that can provide the right balance of skills to solve problems, the right tools and technologies. And as I alluded to, during the introduction, partnering with our clients and stakeholders in the government, because again, that's where we are. It's a better way to address some of these when they know that we and the way we work with them is one of partnership. And not selling products and services and things like that. Yes, I certainly want to be paid. I get a paycheck, but it's a cultural sort of thing. And that's one of the things I like about this place, is that ability to team and work together to solve problems. And frankly, it extends. I mean, Athena mentioned the pandemic. We've had to interact in totally new ways. I think that opens up some opportunities to partner even farther than perhaps we've thought of before. Dare I even say, again, even internationally and globally, that there are some opportunities there that we might want to consider. So thank you.
I think that's an excellent point. That the State Department the last several years is very much promoting international partnering and collaboration on cyber. So thank you. And Chris, thoughts on partnering and collaboration and the importance?
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, the SolarWinds incident pointed that out. I mean, I know with some of my colleagues, even outside of Mantech, just setting aside within some just private mailing lists, some of us had seen some of these indicators going back months and months and months. So we were sharing, right? But had no greater visibility into what other organizations were having those problems. But I think there's a lot of opportunities for one, organizations, whether you're commercial or a contractor to the government or whatnot, there are ISACs, information sharing communities that you can join. If you're too small or can't find one that fits your niche, there are opportunities to collaborate with other companies that are in your space, even informally. I know here in Miami, there's a number of groups that get together weekly, some get together monthly. They have just mailing lists, and they share indicators. They share, hey, I saw this weird thing. Anybody else seeing this weird thing? And there's, I think, lots of ways to do it. So it could even be at a grassroots level of just organizations starting to share what they're seeing that looks anomalous on their networks. It doesn't have to be this grand, super collaboration, because all of that will eventually roll up. And as there becomes a more coherent public-private partnership, information sharing narrative, anybody would be able to, I think, contribute to that.
Thank you. Fairfax County Economic Development has a wonderful cybersecurity map of companies in the region involved and engaged in cybersecurity, and Fairfax County EDA promotes the idea of a cyber ecosystem that we have here, being a leading one in the country. But from your company's perspectives, how do you try to recruit cybersecurity talent, and do you have a hard time doing it? And what do you see as keys to fostering a cybersecurity workforce?
I can start with that if you'd like.
Oh, yes, please.
So at Mantech, we have a very healthy and extensive internship program that we run. So we're actively out recruiting from colleges and universities all over the country, bringing students in. In many cases, we actually start them down their clearance process as well, because we all know that takes quite a bit of time. So we can do that and get people coming in. They have hopefully they have fun with us. They learn with us, and then they're hopefully well disposed to come back to us when they're ready to enter the job market. Other ways that we recruit are through extensive training programs. We offer a number of ways for inbound cyber talent to continue to enhance their skill sets. Degree programs through our university partnerships, like George Mason. Little plug there, as well as industry certification programs, training, et cetera. And I think, as all of us know, if you're a cyber operator, you're in a constant arms race, not only with your adversaries, but also just technology and staying up to date. So.
Thank you, Athena or Rob. How do you all go about recruiting for the cybersecurity practice?
Very similarly. It is a competitive workforce. We could definitely use more folks wanting to join in the cybersecurity field. Also, we have a pretty extensive internship as well. We start recruiting and looking for folks who have interest in supporting federal and the IC customers at colleges and universities. Once we get them on board, we continue to invest in them in terms of career development as well as training. We'll send them to conferences, support them getting additional certifications, all in hopes of retaining them and keeping them here, and being able to help them grow and support other things. So they might start off somewhere and then have an idea in terms of where they want to specialize in, and we help them do that. But definitely skilled talent is on the demand. It is very much needed.
Thank you, Athena. And Rob, you just recently moved to Unisant.
Yes, I've been here a little bit more than half a year. And we have done some significant hiring in that time because our cybersecurity work program is growing. So I'll just add a couple things to what Chris and Athena said. Yes, even in a small company, we have interns, and we are looking at folks coming fresh out of college early in their career. But I do want to add one more aspect to the hiring situation that I think we all kind of have a good feel for, is that we also need people that we can put close to our clients, close to our stakeholders, and therefore those communication skills along with the technical skills. I guess I call them the whole people skills, right? Because with a small company, yes, we do have some folks we can put in the lab, and they will be heads down doing technical work. But even better if they then can be somebody who can present either internally to the rest of our staff about ransomware, blockchain, some of the things that are on artificial intelligence, things that are on the front burner, topics that are on the front burner, or they can again share that with our government stakeholders and clients and other partners. That's a win-win for us. So we're not just dipping into the early career professional pool, but we've definitely been lucky with some recent hires where we've got some people out of that pool who have some pretty good whole person skills. And so I just wanted to add that to what Chris and Athena said, which definitely applies to our company as well.
Okay, thank you, Rob. One last question on attracting talent is, what is the cybersecurity career path like for someone in your companies? If someone comes in as a recent graduate, what might their first 5 years look like if they do really well?
Well, I can speak to our company. So with Unisant, we have very long-term relationships with our government clients. And that's probably true with Mantech and so on. That said, there's also an opportunity to move laterally as well as within a team. We actually just had one of our cyber folks become the manager of a project, and so now has a small team that reports to this techie person because, again, of those whole people skills. And so to see that even the few months that I've been here at Unisant, that's a rewarding thing. And our people see that, our technical people see that. Again, the horizontal opportunities as well as the vertical opportunities. Maybe not as big as Mantech, for instance, but Unisant is certainly trying to take care of its people as they look at their career.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a specific question for each one of our panelists because they've all done really fascinating work. And Chris, you wrote a really interesting article on zero trust, which started out with a meeting between Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev in Reykjavik in 1986. So if you could please comment on your article and how you tied that meeting to zero trust.
Sure. Yeah, the comment was just the famous, trust but verify, right? When speaking about the Soviets back then. They were negotiating an arms agreement. So much can be said, or much the same can be said of zero trust. I mean, the problem with the traditional corporate networking environments of yesteryear, perimeter based, et cetera, is once you've been authenticated, you're in the network. You probably have way too much access inside the network. That you don't need to do your job, right? And zero trust is really about, again, attack surface reduction, right? So one, we're verifying who you are, the human, we're verifying and validating your device, and then policy and context feed into that. So policy says what I'm supposed to have access to in the context that I'm in. So, am I inside the corporate network, physically plugged in an office? Am I on the corporate Wi-Fi? Am I at a Starbucks? Am I in a hotel in a foreign country? What time of day? All of those things can factor into zero trust, and you can do that continuously so that if the context for my use and my access changes, then my entitlement changes, and that can happen dynamically. So, when we deploy Zero Trust, it's oriented that way: identity-centric, context, and being dynamic.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. And Athena, you've written and spoken quite a bit on transformative leadership. If you could please comment in the cybersecurity world.
Sure, absolutely. It was mainly focused around transformative leadership in disruptive times. So it really came about from the pandemic, how quickly to utilize emerging technologies to support a remote workforce. You very, very quickly, almost overnight, went from having your teams co-located, working together, collaborating in person, to everyone being in their own space. So heavily relying on, whether, all the various different virtual meeting tools that are out there, very quickly assessing which ones had the higher vulnerabilities, which ones could be more secure, and kind of adapting and figuring out how you were going to continue to support your day-to-day job in a remote environment, as well as continue to lead those teams. Being able to, when your team is all collated together, it's easy to stop by and say, great job. When you don't see them every day, it's still just as important to remember to reach out and be able to stay connected to lead those teams and keep them motivated and highly energized and engaged when they're all not feeding from each other's energy. So the transformative leadership was really taking a look at some of the different technologies and different ways of leading in that environment during a disruptive time. And that really is relevant with cybersecurity, because again, you went overnight, basically having folks working remotely. And so therefore it was just as much as critical, not only from motivating and energizing employees, but also making sure that they were able to connect securely from their own homes and not compromise any of the company data. And then making employees aware, right? I think that's the next thing. Is there's a lot that we can do to secure a network, but if someone at your house leaves your front door unlocked, well, then you didn't do very well in trying to stop your house from getting burglarized. And so it's very similar along those lines in the cybersecurity domain, making sure employees are very much aware in terms of being secure and protecting data and what to avoid and locking things down, right?
Thank you, Athena. You led a quite large effort back at MITRE on the idea of how to spur the adoption rate of technology for cybersecurity, and also how to accelerate innovation in cybersecurity. If you can please give us some thoughts on those two topics.
Yes, so innovation, I think, is core to any of the successes that we're going to have, certainly the ones we've had before. It's people have ideas. Our attackers and the defenders are applying different approaches to solving these problems, whichever the problem is. The attackers want to find new ways to get in, and the tools and technologies we have are going to keep offering those. But there are innovative ways to solve some of these problems. We've talked about zero trust, and we've talked about mobile devices. We've talked about some of the realities that we have today. We are not going to build a firewall encased automotive security system. That's not the way it's going to work. So zero trust has got to be a part of that. And we have to work within those realities. And we have to work within the reality that that's going to be a target for attack. We've mentioned the Colonial Pipeline a couple times. Ransomware is a reality. Innovation, but also procedures, processes, policies, how we do things. We have to innovate those as well, because again, it's a new reality. Our infrastructure is just a golden target. Our organizations, our companies, our targets. Any system, I think of the OPM hack of several years ago, where there's just a huge database that is a very, it's a crown jewel, right? It's a high value asset. And so, yes, innovation is a key piece of that. And here in Unison, as a small company, we do things sort of like what Athena was just saying. we keep the conversation going. In our newsletter, we talk about cybersecurity every newsletter. Yes, certainly phishing attacks are important, but people are on the front line of that. But then there are other topics that are just important. Ransomware is certainly something we're going to be talking about internally. So we're going to keep that conversation going so that people think of ways to innovate, not only the folks in our labs, but the folks that are working directly with our clients. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There's a professor that we work with at University College London, Angela Sass, and she's done some research and the idea, or from her research working with companies, that about 70% or so of compromises are inadvertent by someone on the staff clicking on something. About 20% are staff trying to do workarounds of clumsy systems in order to do their jobs, and about 10% is malicious. And so, can you please comment whether you think those percentages are ballparkish, if that's a good way to split the type how compromises occur, and if so, what the implications are for cybersecurity?
I'll start with that. I think they also reasonable. I think in all of our experience, that's critical. I think I've seen stats like 80% of all breaches over the last couple of years can be associated with an internal user usually clicking on some kind of a phishing email. So it always starts with people. But I always like to say, sometimes there's an overemphasis. There's always an imbalance sometimes, an overemphasis on user awareness training. I think user awareness training has a place. I think it can be useful. I think that if the security and integrity of your networks depend on Johnny in accounting not clicking that really well-crafted phishing email, you've got a problem. So it should be a balance of, yes, I need to educate my user base, but two, I need to put systems and protocols and procedures in place such that when that person fails, there are stopgaps, and do not let that malware, that intruder, wildfire through your environment. And we've all seen examples of that. Ransomware is just sort of the most recent manifestation and the most obvious manifestation of how destructive that kind of malware can truly be.
Thank you. Rob or Athena, comments on that question?
If I may, I agree 100% with what Chris said. A phrase that I've used, actually I have it written on my board right up here in my office, is we need to make it easy to do the right thing. And quite frankly, we're teaching our people, our society is teaching people to click on things. If I say clickbait, you all know what that is, right? Things are attractive. We use our email systems to communicate, and we put links in there because it's convenient, right? And so we expect our people to click on things. And so we want the right thing to happen. And Chris is right. There's a technology, there's a process, there's a system aspect of that behind what our users are doing. And we need to architect and develop systems, develop processes that take that reality into account. If we don't take that reality into account and we design things without that, then we're going to continue to find us in the same situation we're in today. And so we need to think smarter to get out of that. And so make it easy to do the right thing, both for the user, but also if you architect your system, if you come up with a strategy and a plan that makes it easier to then secure it, segmentation of network subnets and things like that, using access controls and other, the fundamental tools, ports and protocols as well, blacklisting, whitelisting, and then good, smart sensors, analytics, and then frankly, train people watching what's going on your network. You can deal with a lot of this, but you've got to architect it and design it in. So make it easy to do the right thing doesn't just apply to the end user. It applies to the technical staff and the people that are building your systems.
Thank you, Rob. Athena?
Chris and Rob have covered that very, very well. I don't really have anything other than to add, other than I completely agree with both.
Okay, thanks. If the questions from the audience, you can please start typing them into Q&A, and we'll ask those to the panelists too. Palo Alto Networks has a slide, but I think many of the vendors do. It's a funnel, and at the top there's the millions of events, and then how AI helps parse those down to a relatively small number that human analysts can look at. And so that's how they depict the potential benefit from AI. And they also overlay onto that the idea of machine speed. And so to combat cyber, which is at machine speed, you also need machines. So all three of you work at companies which are leading edge. So how do you see and where do you see AI fitting in as part or contributing to cybersecurity technologies? So
if I may, I mentioned in the introduction that Unisant's bona fides are actually data. We are a data company, a data analytics company. Data, it sounds like a cliche, but I'll say it. I apologize. I was going to stop myself. Data makes the world work. It makes everything work, right? And we need our industry recognizes it. I think academia recognizes it. I'm sure the government does as well. But I'll just say it. We need to think about our data as this important resource that if you don't have access to it, think of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Ransomware, you've got an availability problem. If they're going to leak your sensitive stuff, you're here in the DC area, the police, there's been in the news that that data has been exfiltrated about sensitive police activities and investigations that they're doing. They don't want to get that released. So when you think of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, stuff that's in our bone marrow, the world is starting to understand that because it's all about data. So it's the sort of thing that this company grew up on, and everybody else, if they haven't learned it and understand it now, they certainly will quickly. If not based upon recent events, certainly things that's going to touch them sooner or later. Thank you.
And to add to that, one of the more both disturbing trends, and maybe it's the silver lining in the mushroom cloud, but there's extortionware. So ransomware that not only encrypts all your data, but exfils it first so that the adversary gets two swipes at you. One, pay me to decrypt your data, and two, pay me to not share your data on the public internet, right? So where we're using ML and AI right now, so, data isn't the problem, right? It's not that, I think anybody here on this call would say, yeah, I don't have enough cyber data. It's quite the opposite, right? You have way too much data. The key is making sense of that data in an actionable way, and doing it timely so that the adversary can be dealt with. The Target breach from way back, and I know I'm dating myself a bit, but one thing I found fascinating about that breach was the indicator of compromise was in their systems. This came out later. So it was buried in the noise of all the other security events that were going on at that time. And, over the years, talking to colleagues, CISOs and whatnot in the industry, everybody longs for that. Hey, show me the one event today that's going to kill me if I don't deal with it, right? Of the 20,000 events I got in the last hour, which of those is going to kill me? So where ML and AI, I think, really can help is detecting that anomaly that can be elevated to the top of the pile so that the human operators can deal with it. That's sort of the minimum. And then as those technologies mature to where we can trust them, right? We've done enough test and evaluation. We can let the machine start to intervene and do that in a comfortable way. And I think part of what I'm seeing on the zero trust front, not to beat that dead horse, but one nice thing about ZT, depending on how you deploy it and how you architect it, it allows for mitigations to occur at an individual level, at an identity level, but it's also easy to undo. So if we've made an error, so if we automate and make an error, it's easy to fix it versus, oh, I shut the whole company off from access to, part of the internet, and, we just lost $1 million because we were down an hour while we figured it out. No, I probably just took out maybe 1 or 2 users and isolated them in some minimal way. So I think we're also getting to the point where we can start to do surgical mitigations versus these bulk gross mitigations that we typically have seen in the past.
Thank you. Athena, from yours or Novetta's standpoint?
Yeah, so we actually, at Novetta, we do have an ML Center of Excellence, and they're taking a look at not just using ML in cybersecurity, but for lots of different applications. On the cybersecurity side, being able to utilize ML to create data models for threat hunting as well as vulnerability assessments is useful. But again, it's not the answer for it doesn't solve the entire problem, because it is, a model. And while you're trying to make it automated, you definitely, it's not perfect. And maybe in 3 or 4 years, we'll get to a point where ML is way smarter than it is today. But it's certainly things that are, it's evolving. But there are a lot of different applications where you could utilize ML to help with processing of data at a quicker speed than trying to do it manually, or doing it the way you've been doing it for the last 3-4 years. That would require way more manpower. As Chris mentioned, the cyber data today is very way more than what we've had before, and I don't think anyone lacks for data. If anything, our challenge is how best to utilize that data and get the information that you need out of it in a timely manner. It can't take you months to find a vulnerability. Months is too long. It's past. So being able to operate and do things at the very, very quickly and efficiently and accurately are all very key things right now in the cyber security domain. If
I could add,
yes, please.
Backing off of both of those, the executive order that just came out referenced something that some folks may not be aware of. It's called a software bill of materials. I think they pronounce it SBOM, right? And when you think of what Chris and Athena just talked about, where you've got all this data, 20,000 whatever's an hour, and you're trying to sift through it to find the needle in the haystack. If the automation can also make use of tools such as what the software is expected to do, what are some of the behaviors, and automatically use that set of data. And again, I'm interpreting what a software bill of materials may look like. That's to be determined, but I know there are very smart people working on that. But imagine doing what Chris just talked about while you're sifting through all this, and you see something going on, or the sensors see something going on, and some artificial intelligence can simply look, and some machine learning obviously would be going on under the hood, can look at this and go, this is different and it's not expected. I'm going to now raise that alert, versus these sorts of behaviors are expected, but it's slightly different, and we'll monitor it and just track it. That sort of automation can make a significant difference. And it's entirely possible that the SBOM may be a key piece of the solution to this aspect of it going forward. Let's stay tuned. Let's roll up our sleeves and see where that takes us.
Thank you, Athena, Rob, and Chris. 2 other quick questions, and then thank you for everyone in the audience who submitted questions so far. If you can, I'm sure there's many others too, if you can continue sending them in. Regulation is always an interesting topic. To what degree it should be, there should be requirements on businesses or voluntary standards. So for example, state of New York requires financial services firms over a certain size to have a CISO. Other industries, it's much more voluntary, and there's a patchwork around the country, industry by industry and state by state. So what are your personal views, not your company views, on what regulation should be in the world of cybersecurity?
I'll lead with that. Having a CISO or not, I think it doesn't solve a problem, right? That's just a person in a role. I think that what a lot of organizations need to take a hard look at is, are you even doing the basics? And there's tons of resources out there for any size organization. You can start with, for example, SANS publishes sort of their top 10 things that you need to deal with at any point in time. And I think that one of the critical infrastructure organizations publishes that every year. So there's lots of resources of, look, if you go do these 10 things, you're going to be protected from 80%. I'm making that number up. I don't know if it's accurate or not, but some large percentage of the majority of the breaches we see today, right? An organization that I'm involved with here in Florida, it's called Cyber Florida, and we were constructed by the legislature in Florida to help manage and coordinate the curriculum for the state university system. But an offshoot of that is we publish every year a guide for small and medium businesses to just help them sort of find their way in cyber, right? Like, what are the basic things you need to be doing as a small organization to make yourself a harder target, so you don't just get hit by ransomware, for example, target of opportunity. I think, in talking to smaller organizations, sometimes they say like, well, I'm a plumbing supply company. Nobody would ever target me. I'm like, well, you have compute power. It doesn't matter that what you do, you might be a target of opportunity, and you might become an inadvertent victim just because you happen to make the mistake at the wrong time. And, again, there's just a lot of things that people can do, organizations can do, even individuals can do to make themselves more secure on the internet.
Thank you, Chris. Athena or Rob, a comment on regulation?
Well, I'll make one comment. Historically, companies have not wanted to let it be publicly known when they have been the victim of an attack. As you can imagine, it can have an impact on their bottom line. It can certainly affect, future contracts and opportunities and things like that. That's a reality. That said, hiding, especially if you hide enough that you don't then take appropriate action in response to something, is not good either. And so for those of us who've looked at this new executive order, any companies that intend to do business with the federal government, the executive order is going to try to open that up. We may find out there's a lot more going on than we knew about before. I think that's probably likely, actually. But regulation is probably going to be necessary because they're talking about putting it in the federal acquisition regulations, some sort of language to be determined. Because, again, companies, they got to look at their bottom line. They have to look at their future profitability. So, there's a balance to everything. I'm an engineer. Everything's got, pros and cons. But I personally tend to come down on the side of more openness on these attacks because they're just so prevalent, and they're going to continue to be prevalent. And it allows us to maybe start tracking some things too with a little bit more visibility. Again, I'm speculating as to where that kind of openness could take us. But there certainly are places for regulation.
And then CMMC has the assessor role too. Athena, any thoughts or comments on regulation or CMMC?
Yeah, I was actually just going to bring up CMMC. The government I think there was this prevailing assumption that companies were doing very well with their networks and protecting their own data. So therefore, any information that the government gave you that you stored on your company network was going to be very well protected. And as we saw, many years back at the start of the NIST cybersecurity standards and then CMMC, the government is now is basically regulating and kind of having a mandate of a base standard. At a minimum, your networks are going to need to be able to do X, Y, and Z and have these features and functions in order to ensure for them that their data that they're providing to us in order for us to support them is going to be protected. And there are already FAR clause and DFAR clauses that include that language in terms of protecting the government. Incident reporting is starting to be, seen in government contracts in terms of regulation being more forthcoming and stepping up and saying, yes, we had this incident. This is how it was impacted. This is how it was resolved. This is what happened and transpired. So I do see that. I don't think it's going to get any easier by no means. I think we're going to start off with a baseline and kind of go from there especially as emerging technologies in the cybersecurity realm continues to evolve so quickly. I think things that were written, years ago, was a nice base standard to have. But I think, over time, we're going to see it tighten up as this environment continues to change.
Thank you. And one last question, and then we'll have some questions from the audience. I think you all mentioned 5G. To what extent do you think that having more computational power at the end will change the challenges of cybersecurity?
Yeah, I was going to mention that earlier, JP. Athena made a very good point early about IoT, and 5G is an enabler for IoT. right? It'll allow more devices to connect at very low latency, and new devices that normally you wouldn't be able to connect, or you wouldn't want to connect because latency is so high, et cetera. So we're going to see, and we're seeing an explosion of new devices connecting. One thing that I think is really important to understand when you think about IoT and 5G, and a lot of what's happening on those networks is machine to machine. So a lot of data is moving around that's not really intended or designed for human viewing or consumption. And so as we design security, both methodologies and technologies to protect and defend and analyze those networks, we have to take those things into account. So it won't just be volume and velocity, it'll also just be the nature of that traffic, that there's not necessarily going to be a human in that loop anywhere anymore. And so our systems will have to take that into account. And it's going to be very challenging. And I think we said earlier, ML and AI are really nice because they help us filter that data down. They help us find that needle in a haystack. I think when it comes to looking at dense IoT, 5G enabled networks, ML AI will be requisite. It will no longer be a nice thing to have. It will be a have to have.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Athena or Rob?
I certainly would add that some of the fundamentals, I mean, Athena just mentioned, the fundamentals certainly have to mature and grow over time. But in the environment that Chris just described, which again it's the real environment. 5G is here, IoT is here, mobile devices are here, and yet we're still finding us having to cobble on security after the fact. There are still hard-coded passwords. If we're not, Chris mentioned, SANS, which again, I think CIS or somebody is, they're publishing them now, but you got this list of the fundamental things, and we're not getting those right. It's the 21st century, people. It's time to start getting those right. It's the reality that we got to work with. We can't fight reality. It makes no sense to ignore reality.
Okay, thank you. And so we'll start on some of the questions from the audience. From Michael Jones, has the federal government provided enough tools, funding to keep up with evolving threats? Where are new resources needed? Athena, would you like to please start with that one?
Sure. I think on the funding side, I think it depends on whether or not we're talking about developing tools in support of the federal government, or if we're talking about complying with CMMC. That is, being compliant with CMMC and NIST is a company investment in order to do business with the federal government. So we're not getting funding on that front. But when it comes to helping them with cybersecurity and doing assessments, developing tools and recommendations for their own networks, I think the answer there is yes. But it is very much an evolving, continuing, it's not a one and done. You certainly can't go in and say, we've made this assessment, and here are our recommendations, and then walk away. Because, as we've been mentioning, there's always new software, always new things that are connecting, and there's just, it's very much an evolving situation. And I'm not quite sure that everyone, whether, and I'm not just going to pick on the federal government, I'm not sure that every company and customer out there fully recognizes and realizes that. I think at times their approach is, I'm just going to have you come out, take a look at my network. You say it's good to go. Awesome. I'm going to keep on going, not realizing that it has to be continuously monitored and validated to ensure that an unknown threat didn't make its way in just based off of a software update. It could be that simple.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I completely agree. And I think that, the federal government has a role to play, but it is not solely the federal government's responsibility, right? I mean, again, there are tons of resources for how do I protect myself, my organization, what are the basic cyber hygiene things I need to do for my organization, okay? And I think everybody can participate in that. I think where the federal government has a role and I think we're seeing, aggressive movement in that space recently is, the new EO, the new executive order, and there's been some questions about it. And I know we're going to post some information about that, but that EO is probably, and think, Rob and Athena, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is probably the most extensive cyber-focused executive order that I can recall being issued ever. And it does things like, we talked earlier about information sharing, and information sharing is important and collaboration is important. But one of the reasons that companies have been hesitant to share with the federal government is there was always this concern that I share my information, it becomes public, and it dings my stock price, or I get penalized for it. Well, it now allows for anonymous sharing of information in many ways. And I think that's a huge step, right? I think the federal government also has a great role to play when it comes to nation state class adversaries. To expect that, Joe's plumbing supply can defend themselves against, let's say Russian nation state backed actors, that's just patently absurd, right? I mean, you can't expect farmers to defend themselves against special forces. The government's role is to detect and help mitigate those classes of adversaries. And it does that in various ways, right? Some are very classified and some are very public. And I think the government has moved over the years towards a greater emphasis on sharing what it can, when it can, about these threats. I think I've seen more coming out of CISA, for example, notifications of various nation state adversaries and various threat groups at an actionable level of detail than I think I remember probably in the last decade. So those things give me great pride in my government, and also great hope that these will all start to feed into better posture.
Yeah, so I agree. I do want to emphasize CISA has really come into its own. It's a mature organization, and the materials that they have been producing, I've been really, really pleased as a technical person, but also as a member of the public. I think they get it right. And the ability to have that sort of information and trust that information and know that you can use it at all levels, that's important. But otherwise, yeah, I agree completely with what Chris and Athena said. That's the right mark.
Thank you. Here's a very interesting question from anonymous attendee. If we are able to track and identify known actors outside of government entities, is there a role for the federal government contractors to take offensive action to mitigate the likelihood or frequency of future attack?
I'm going to let somebody else answer that one.
There's a lot of angles to that one.
There is. Yeah, that's a very complicated question. I think you have to start unpacking that a little bit. What do you mean by offensive, for example? Is that a hackback? Is that something different? Federal government contractors. Okay, well, that also has a certain different meaning as well. So, there's been discussions. I know there was some legislature that was proposed a couple of years ago. I don't believe it really went anywhere, but it was that, not only just federal contractors, it was, authorizing anybody who was the victim of a hack to take certain steps that previously would have been considered, offensive cyber, hacking back, depending on the label you want to use. And to me, it wasn't so much the legislation itself. What was fascinating was the discussion around it. Because then well, what about liability? What if I make a mistake when I'm hacking back or doing whatever you want to call it, and it turns out the adversary had compromised, say, a hospital on the way to compromise me, and now I'm attacking back and I end up taking down the hospital, just as an extreme example. Okay, well, who's responsible for that? Was it the initial adversary, or is it now me because I made the mistake? So that gets into a very, very rapid quagmire of legal liabilities, technical capabilities, authorities, legal authorities. So that we could probably spend half a day just talking about that one question. So
yeah, there's a lot of settled law on what sort of response is proportional and appropriate to physical, social, and those sort of things. And now we have this internet-based opportunity to do things. And again, what is the appropriate, there's not a lot of settled law there. Let's just be perfectly frank. And it's international law by nature. And so that adds just additional layers to what Chris was just describing. I have sat down in a government space at a government computer as a contractor sitting next to the Govy right there. That Govy has certain protections that I simply don't have by virtue of me, wearing, a green badge, right? That's just the reality of it. And so a lot of that is going to have to be settled. Hopefully not, using the example that Chris just gave where a hospital gets taken down, but that may be what's going to force some of this to get addressed and settled. So buckle up and let's ride this one out for a while.
Okay. Kind of interesting question that you all raised. In the medical device world, the Food and Drug Administration, they approve medical devices, and they'll approve a medical device if it's similar to a previous one. But of course, the software isn't quite the same, and there's versioning of software. So FDA has been looking at evaluating the manufacturer and their software development practices as a way to have a better handle that the software might be okay and secure. So in your company's worlds, how do you see evaluating software or knowing that the software is secure?
Well, in Unisant, we have to, because again, our clients are federal clients, we have to comply with all of those requirements, all of the certifications. And so if we have to deliver a set of test results, a set of evaluations, we do that. If we have to meet, some sort of a set of criteria, we will always do that. It comes down to what is appropriate, but also what is required. And we talked about regulations, several minutes ago. That there's an aspect of that that's just, it's a reality in the world in which we operate. And so I would say that as we go forward with advanced tools, perhaps with some machine learning based tools, perhaps with a more up-to-date set of criteria, and what is good and what is good enough and what is acceptable, that can be advanced. And certainly Unisant, as well as the others, we would move forward with what the technology, what is available and possible in the future. So I hope that kind of starts addressing that, but that's my take.
Thank you very, very much so. Okay. Kind of somewhat related is to what extent do you think Sec DevOps is the wave of the future, and what does that actually mean in your worlds or in the world of government contracting?
Beyond the buzzword, there is
very much a buzzword.
There's a piece of reality there. I mentioned that IT modernization is one of the things that we do. I have no doubt that the rest do as well. Cyber modernization, DevOps, and agile development. There's a lot of maturity in those approaches to developing software, developing and fielding versions quicker, and actually providing value sooner. I am of an age where I actually have developed things under the old waterfall model, and get those requirements polished up, and we can then deliver it, right? That's just not the way software is going to work ever again. So when we put in security, and some people want to move it to the front, Sec DevOps, which I have a hard time saying because it just doesn't flow as well as DevSecOps. They're trying to emphasize that security is a capability and a feature right from the start. And I think I asserted a few minutes ago, we really, really need to get reality on, get on board with reality, and we need to start building security in. I'm still too concerned that it's a bit of a buzzword, but the direction trying to achieve it, I think, is a good thing. It's not a silver bullet. It really is not a silver bullet, but it is an approach, and I'm optimistic that some folks will truly embrace it.
I think there's two positive, well, lots of, but two that I'll highlight, two positive elements that I'll highlight. One is exactly what Rob said, pulling the security function, however you define that, within your pipeline, pulling it further forward. Is it the first step? Not necessarily, but should be early enough to say, hold on, guys, that design has some inherent architectural flaws that you're never going to be able to solve for. So let's fix that now, right? The other nice element about DevOps and SecOps, whatever, is speed. and not only speed to develop and deploy, but also to fix. So I'm deploying constantly, right? I'm deploying smaller, micro features or feature elements at a time. If I realize I've just introduced a security vulnerability, hopefully it didn't make it that far, but if one does slip by, it's also easy to get rid of because, I can do it in my next iteration versus, oh man, I got to wait till, my next major release, or I got to issue an emergency patch and hope everybody patches it. So that's one of the advantages of, where DevSecOps and DevOps really shines is in, cloud-enabled environments and container-enabled environments where I can very rapidly roll out code, roll out containers and tear them down. And so I was at an organization not too long ago where just operationally, things were stood up, via containers very quickly. And sometimes if we saw a security incident, we didn't even bother to really, let's go investigate it. Let's just burn the thing to the ground, figure out what was going on and redeploy and, do the forensics in the background. But if I'm burning containers down so rapidly, I don't leave the adversary, even though they've compromised. That's another thing about zero trust, by the way, is you always assume breach. I'm not giving the adversary much time to actually play in my environment. And so that also introduces a cost to the adversary.
Thank you. Athena?
Actually don't have much more to add to that than what Chris and Rob had already covered.
Okay, thank you.
I do like Chris's statement about adding cost to the adversary. We haven't really talked about that yet. And that's an important point. Some of the things that the executive order is getting at is still reactive, but anything that we can do, it feels more proactive. If we can do things that can make it more difficult, costly, challenging for an adversary to attack and then exfiltrate and steal data, those sorts of things. And so some of those design features we talked about earlier in this conversation, as Chris just said, try it quickly and then address it quickly. There are things that we can be doing, and I hope everybody who's participating today recognizes that this is not only a reactive space. Again, I'm an engineer. I like solving problems, and that requires us to look forward. And I'm glad Chris shared that because that's just a good idea.
Okay, thank you. And from the audience, if you have one last question that we can use as a wrap-up, that'd be fantastic.
Hey, while we're waiting for that, JP, one thing I'll just throw out that I think is an interesting literal cost imposition that we saw recently was there was some news, I think Friday night, that the Dark Side ransomware group, the group that allegedly targeted the Colonial Pipeline, that their Bitcoin wallet all of a sudden got emptied out of $5.5 million worth of Bitcoin. Unknown who took that money, but I think that's an interesting deterrent. Nothing else. That certainly is an imposition of cost, right? You just lost $5 million, which, by the way, is remarkably close to the amount of ransom paid by Colonial Pipeline.
Very much so, Chris. With that, if each of you could please make some closing remarks, and we'll start with Rob and then go to Chris, and then Athena can wrap up. So Rob, some closing remarks, please.
So I've made a couple statements that I firmly believe are true. We have to operate within the reality of today and what we expect things to look like tomorrow. People, the message is clear. Ransomware is a service. You can buy that on the dark web. You don't have to build your own. Social engineering, phishing, you just buy that. You don't have to build your own. And so we need to recognize that this reality is going to keep happening. 5G, mobile devices, Internet of Things, those are all realities. And so let's look towards solving the security challenges that we can envision already going forward. And like I say, as an engineer, I want to be on the team that helps solve some piece of that as we move it forward. This is an exciting time, but we can't ignore what reality is.
Thank you, Rob. And Chris?
Yeah, no, I echo Rob's comment at the end there. It's an exciting time, both true excitement and terrifying as well. When I look at some of the emerging technology areas, IoT and 5G, I'm both in love with what is possible there and also deep concern about the security implications. So we have a lot of work to do as a community of cybersecurity practitioners. We have a lot of work to do as a nation and an industry. I think also, there are things like zero trust, ML and AI, other ways we can start to look at cybersecurity. And then if we start putting these things together in the right ways, I think we can, start to improve our resilience to breach. I think that's the way to start looking at it. Being breached or not cannot be a binary position. I think you always have to assume an adversary of sufficient sophistication and motivation is potentially moving through your environment. What you want to do is make that difficult and expensive and time consuming and fraught with peril for them, where they're going to trip an alarm and get caught. And so there's lots of ways we can start to do that with new architectures, new technologies, from a detection and mitigation, all anchored down with data analytics and AI. So that emerging space to me is fascinating.
Thank you, Chris. And Athena?
I will wrap up with kind of where we started in terms of collaboration and partnerships. Those will be key, as private companies and public companies. If we can work with and partner with some of the service providers and some of the companies that are out there creating the cybersecurity tools, that becomes even more imperative for us to be able to share back data, vulnerabilities that we're either finding or suggestions for improvements. So partnerships and collaboration within the cybersecurity field is definitely something that is going to be very much valued and needed as we move forward as we move forward, working with a lot of so many emerging technologies and new software that's constantly being released, and new Internet of Things every day, something new.
Thank you, Athena, and thank you, Athena, Chris, and Rob for joining and for your wonderful insights. And I'll turn it back over to Charlie.
Thanks, JP. And I want to second what JP said. Athena and Rob and Chris, this is wonderful. I mean, you get so many marks on a conversation that I could have only, imagined. And I really just very much appreciate it. For our attendees, if you give me a moment, I'd like to go ahead and start a 2-minute tutorial on what the AirMeet virtual networking tool will provide to you. And then the next part of the webinar can begin. So just a second.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the first webinar of our 3-part series on new priorities in federal spending at George Mason University Center for Government Contracting. I'm Micah Kemp with the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. As you heard from our CEO, Victor Hoskins, earlier, our mission is to attract new businesses and help companies grow here in Fairfax County. We partner with companies depending on their needs, but our confidential and free services include assistance with workforce development and hiring incentives, finding office space, media and exposure opportunities, network introductions, access to public services, and much more. We will have several EDA staff, including myself, in the networking session, and would love to talk to you about how we can assist your company's growth here in Fairfax County. We are pleased to host this webinar's virtual networking session for attendees to continue the conversation we've had today and connect on the AirMeet platform. As AirMeet may be new to many of you, we'll have a brief tutorial on how to start. To begin, please select the AirMeet link provided in the chat of this Zoom webinar, or open it from your reminder email or the webinar website under the Virtual Networking tab. Once open, the link opens to a session landing page. Once the link opens to the session landing page, select Enter Event and create your networking badge with your name, title, and organization information. Select Continue to then enter the AirMeet session and start networking. The AirMeet session operates like an in-person post-conference networking session, where you can meet one-on-one, join special interest tables, and message participants directly. To participate in the one-on-one networking, simply click Start Speed Networking, and you'll be connected with another attendee for a 2-minute session. Once those 2 minutes is up, you can either stay in the speed networking area to meet new people or exit back to the lobby. From the lobby, you can also join a table by clicking on a seat at the table and joining the group conversation. We'd ask that you please limit your time at any one table to 15 minutes so that others can have a chance to cycle through. Lastly, you can also participate in the group chat or reach out directly to participants by selecting their badge from the attendees section on the toolbar and sending them a message. If you encounter any inappropriate behavior from one of our guests, please contact the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority host in the chat. Thank you again for participating in today's event, and we hope you enjoy the networking session. We'll see you in there.
Well, thank you for that. With that, the webinar is over. Our panelists can relax and enjoy some nice weather outside. I'll stay on for a few minutes in case any attendees are having issues with finding the link to join the virtual networking session. But please give it a go. Thank you very much.